The modern system of slavery. Most people believe that they are free because the media and politicians tell them that they are, however in truth we are merely slaves caught up in an illusion we think is being freedom. Freedom is very simple, it is the ability to be an individual free from all law. In order to have law, which is in of itself an artificially created reason to control someone other than you, force is used to gain compliance, hence force of law. However, this is done without gaining permission from the Creator of us, the earth and of all of creation. Their argument falls apart as their authority is based only upon hearsay. They work their authority through fraud, being that everyone and everything is considered to be some form of property, all owned by the ruling bloodline families. At birth your parents give you a name, unknowingly transferring the ownership of that name to the state. We could not be owned if we did not accept names, as it is through the names that ownership of our bodies by the few exists, yet we are not the names, and therein is the fraud. The ruling bloodline families have and are using force against us on a daily basis to gain our compliance to follow a set of laws which we have no say in nor control over, all of which is designed to enrich the bloodline ruling elite families, as all law is based in commerce. Thus for each law broken, millions of dollars are created in various types of bonds and fines, which only benefit the system and the bloodline ruling elite. For your industrialists were the powerful men of the earth, for by your drugging and poisoning were all the nations deceived. Consider the inclusion of modern-day vaccinations in the drugging and poisoning and all the deception that surrounds the vaccine industry. Language is absolutely where the magic lies. Every individual most certainly needs to master their ability to communicate. When we master our ability to communicate, we will realize that only our own communication mastery equals life. The degradation of language, according to Steiner, it is characteristic of the present culture of Ahrimanic scientism and Anglo-American economic imperialism that language has lost its instinctive spiritual meaning, that is, the connection is lost between the literal word and the spiritual impulse that constitutes meaning. Without real, spiritual content, language consists only of empty phrases, such as rule by the will of the people, the free world, individual freedom, and so on. These phrases are largely devoid of reality in our socio-political structure. Here the pervasive actuality is the power of money over men and over life. And where the empty phrase rules in language, mere conventions, rather than living human contact rule in social life, and mere routine, rather than lively human interest, rules in economic life. And, it is only a short step from the empty phrase to the lie. Again, this is especially true in politics and economics, for the prevalence of empty words makes possible the falsification of realities, a potent weapon in the hands of those with occult, conscious intentions to manipulate people for devious ends. Now finally let's take a deep dive into how things really are, what you fail to see and what you fail to hear. But first you need to realize almost everything in this reality is an illusion. All in an effort to shield you from truth and separate your connection to God, Creator, Source. To make you a believer, believer rather than a knower. It's all black magic, trickery, and in plain sight, for those who seek the truth. For example, why do you think when one forms letters into words, they call it spelling? Because you are creating spells when speaking or writing. Why in school did they teach you to write in cursive? Could it be when you spell words and writing in cursive, could you be casting a spell with a curse? How about when you sign your name? Could you be actually putting a curse on yourself? In order for one to successfully maneuver through life in this reality, one must know truth. Otherwise he will be doomed to keep reliving this life again. Because the suffix re means to repeat, and if your life is this reality, this means you have lived this reality before. It all just means less TV, sports, and life distractions, and more seeking and no truth. The closer you will become to God manifesting the Holy Spirit, the kingdom of heaven is within the hearts of men. If you add the sun into the occult meaning of maritime, the word becomes moon sun Saturn, otherwise known as Isis Ra-El, which when truncated becomes Israel equals Israel. This is why everyone, who knows anything about the mystery tradition that the modern desert sky god religions plagiarize, knows that Israel is in the sky. Solomon's starry temple is not to be found as a physical place on the earth. All claims that Israel and the Temple of Solomon are physical locations are erroneous, blasphemous, and immoral due to their intentionally deceptive nature. All members of the human family are Israelites. Everyone is included as God's chosen people. The physical location named Israel is not the real Israel, nor will it ever be, and by their fruit you shall know them. Here is a few other example where you may have believed you thought you knew truth. While English shows roots in many other languages, the words also spell out words and meanings all into themselves. There are many double meanings, or words inside the words. The list could go on, but several examples are shown below. Good, God, remove the letter O out of good and it leaves God. God is in good. Devil, evil, remove the first letter D from devil and you have evil. Evil is in the devil. Universe, universe, the U in universe represents you or them. The in represent and or both and the I represent the self, while the verse represents the experience both will entail. History, his story part history, and add an S, it becomes his story. History has mostly been taken into account by the ruling civilization of that time, therefore, history becoming his story. Justice, just us pronouncing the word justice, sounds similar to saying just us. Many in today's world have felt like it is just them against a corporate establishment, or oppressive government. Realize, realize separate the word realize, with real, being at the forefront, one can then hear the sounds of lies or eyes, coming afterwards. When you realize truth, the eyes can see past the lies. Santa, Satan rearrange the letter in, to the end of Santa, and it becomes if you wish to see beyond the curtain, there are clues all around that exist. Some of those clues come in the form of language. For centuries man has hidden clues and codes in their language, mostly so the particular parties involved could freely communicate amongst themselves, and to do so without the worry of persecution. One must have an open mind and look at things in a different light if one even has a slight chance of awaken from the sleep that has been cleverly perpetrated on them for at least 2,000 years now. For the masses were asleep and enslaved back then as they are sleeping and enslaved today. One only needs to look at some of the early Christian Gospels the Church burned and labeled forbidden to hear the warning. In our time, people en masse act as if they are possessed by evil forces, because, in a way, they are. The demons of materialism speak through empty words. A language in which the demons of materialism have taken the place of human spiritual impulses can lead only to destruction. Certainly Steiner was not the only one to notice this aspect of modern language. George Orwell was perhaps the most prominent writer to decry this trend. See, for instance, his classic essay, Politics and the English Language. He envisioned the dehumanization of language becoming deliberately intensified in the Newspeak of the Aramanic Nightmare 1984. Having no apparent knowledge of spiritual science, and working with only keen observation and a love of truth, he saw what was happening in the political discourse of Western Europe and carried to extremes in the totalitarian regimes. On the socio-political level, the antidote for this poison of empty words is the liberation of cultural life, especially education, from political and financial power. As outlined in Steiner's concept of the threefold commonwealth, the separation of the political right state, the spiritual cultural sphere, and the economic sector, along with the elimination of egotism and coercion from the economy. On the individual personal level, the antidote is the infusion of active, creative thought into language, thus creating a language in which the words point to the thoughts, evoking living thinking in the listeners. If we do not put effort into creating our original thoughts, then ready-made pseudo-thoughts, trite words and phrases, come automatically to mind and carry us along with them, resulting in thinking almost entirely without thoughts. We can at least make the effort to resist these ready-made phrases and generalizations that effortlessly come to mind, and to form mental pictures of particular people, things, and events, and further, to make original word formations describing these things and pictures from varying points of view. The essential point is that we not let our speaking and writing be determined by unconscious influences, but that we call forth through our own efforts new, original thought creations and convey them with original, fluid, artistic word formations. We will not always fully succeed, we are not all poets all the time, but if we consciously make this effort, then we will go far toward recovering the lost human spirituality of language, and consequently, toward the humanization of culture. And, not incidentally, we will thus progress toward living consciously in the thinking free of literal words that is the language of the spirit-soul world in which we will live after death. deceived the nations came into my consciousness, and I made literal note of it with the intention to identify the verse in Revelation. The verse, "For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived." Revelation chapter 18 verse 23 restated in modern English, "For your industrialists were the powerful men of the earth, for by your drugging and poisoning were all the nations deceived." Revelation chapter 18 verse 23. A major key is in the term sorcery. Sorceries 5331, pharmakia original word, pharmikroakia, as he part of speech, noun, feminine transliteration, pharmakia phonetic spelling, pharmakai a. Short definition, magic, sorcery, enchantment definition, magic, sorcery, enchantment. 5331 Pharmakia from pharmako, administer drugs properly, drug-related sorcery, like the practice of magical arts. Word origin from pharmako, to administer drugs. Definition: the use of medicine, drugs or spells. Returning to my starting point with semantic deceit and now combining that with drugging and poisoning, it is no wonder that all the nations have been deceived. Especially if you realize that the both methods are systemic through modern societies and include virtually all of our food, all the industrialized food, virtually all of our environments, certainly all the urban environments served by municipal water systems, the monetary system, government and their subsidiaries such as education, etc. And when licentiousness and disease multiply in a city, are not many courts of law and dispensaries opened, and the arts of chicane and medicine give themselves airs when even free men in great numbers take them very seriously? Will you be able to find a surer proof of an evil and shameful state of education in a city than the necessity of first-rate physicians and judges, not only for the base and mechanical, but for those who claim to have been bred in the fashion of free men? Do you not think it disgraceful and a notable mark of bad breeding to have to make use of a justice imported from others, who thus become your masters and judges, from lack of such qualities in yourself? Plato, Republic 405a 405b. So much relying upon the services of the so-called justice system, with so much hope that justice will be served, hope based on beliefs that judges are impartial. Is it possible for the system to truly serve justice when beliefs are based on an education system designed with semantic deception? Governmental semantic deception. The federal government has been operated under conditions of semantic deceit and fraud by the Federal Reserve System doing business as the United States of America, Inc., and later, by the IMF doing business as the United States, Inc. Bad karma can be found by comparing 18 U.S.C. 1964 and 1964 c. Both statutes grant authority to issue remedies to restrain racketeering activities prohibited by 18 U.S.C. 1962. Section 1964 grants civil jurisdiction to issue injunctive relief to the DCUS. Section 1964 c grants civil jurisdiction to issue injunctive relief to the USDC. Both refer to the exact same subject matter, namely, RICO racketeering influenced and corrupt organizations activities. So, when these two statutes are otherwise identical, why did Congress need to enact two separate statutes? The answer is simple: one authority was needed for the DCUS, and the other was needed for the USDC. Simple, really, when the sedition by syntax is explained in language which penetrates the deception. There is the actual United States composed of 50 independent sovereign nation-states which are geographically defined, the territorial United States which only exists on paper composed of 57 incorporated states of states such as the state of Washington, and the municipal United States which also exists only on paper composed of 57 incorporated states of states such as the state of Ohio. Unfortunately, the perpetrators of this grand fraud were allowed to create these shadow states via the loophole provided by Article 1 Section 8, Clause 17 giving the Congress the plenary right to govern the District of Columbia. So they have They set up shop for themselves in 1864 and have been operating as a crime syndicate ever since. They have played no end of semantic deceits and made false claims against you and your assets, a process called hypothecating debt, and have indulged in constructive fraud and kidnapping and racketeering and inland piracy at your expense. Semantic deceits permeate government, including the education system, all of banking, all of the legal realm, all of the medical industry, most corporations, especially big pharma, big ag, and religious institutions. The first three were always infested with semantic deceits. Medical wasn't as infested until Rockefeller. Corporations became infested in the 1800s. Religious institutions became infected when the Church began attacking the Gnostics and other unorthodoxies. What most of us do not understand about reality is that we live in a world dominated by magic. Until you learn how magic works and how it is being used to control you, you will never know how the world really works. The definition of good and evil, or light and dark, metaphysically can, from an esoteric perspective, be regarded as a dichotomy between those who seek a higher spiritual path for mankind, and those who seek to enchain man to matter. This dichotomy is well portrayed in the standard depictions of the devil Trump in the Tarot Major Arcana. Paul Foster Case, founder of the Builders of the Adytum, gave a particularly apt explanation. In its most general meanings, it signifies mammon and thus big business, the conventions of society, the injustice and cruelty of a social order in which money takes the place of God, in which humanity is bestialized, in which war is engineered by greed masquerading as patriotism, in which fear is dominant. The supreme political authority in America is the American people. Declaration of Independence, Conclusion, Constitution, Preamble, referred to by the Supreme Court as joint tenants in the sovereignty, to wit, a.t. the Revolution, the sovereignty devolved on the people, and they are truly the sovereigns of the country, but they are so without subjects, and have none to govern but themselves. The citizens of America are equal as fellow citizens, and as joint tenants in the sovereignty. Chisholm v. Georgia, 2 U.S. 419, 471, 1793. The sovereign authority in the District of Columbia, however, as ordained by the American people, the joint tenants in the sovereignty in the Constitution, Article 1 Section 8, 17, is Congress. Whereas, there is no provision of the Constitution that authorizes Congress to legislate rules or regulations statutes against joint tenants in the sovereignty, this is not so with residents of the District of Columbia, who are subject to any legislation Congress may impose on them. To ensnare joint tenants in the sovereignty in the banker-contrived artifice of income tax in behalf of their banker creditor, Congress enacted recondite legislation that would foreclose joint tenants in the sovereignty from fully comprehending the law, by transmuting certain everyday words into statutory terms with a convoluted or constitutionally opposite definition and meaning, and formulating statutes and statutory definitions using obscure rules of statutory construction to guarantee maximum complexity, thereby allowing federal executive and judicial officers to operate within the letter of the law and justify treating joint tenants in the sovereignty as residents of the District of Columbia, but without having to explain what they are doing. In other words, Congress enacts legislation as a method used to deceive the people. Title 26 is probably the best example of this. The withholding of truth by ones who knew it to be so simple that everyone can understand it. But at the same time they knew that they would not be capable of maintaining their undue influence, that they could not subjugate humanity unless truth were withheld. And these ideas, which for centuries and centuries have permeated our atmosphere, have obscured it to such an extent that poor humanity has forgotten that it possesses the faculty to pierce the veil and see the truth in all its simplicity, grandeur, and beauty. Lift the veil, let there be light, and everyone will recognize the truth. Another example of similar names deceits being used by lawyers to create deliberate confusions and wrong assumptions and keep us all at each other's throats and unable to square off and deal with the actual problem. Man has been reformed by deceit into believing in the false image of man, the human being. The spiritually discerned human is subject to strong delusion, deceit. 2th 2:10-2:11 And with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. Man has been reformed by deceit into believing in the false image of man, the human being. These legal entities now serve man, the creature, more than the Creator. Romans chapter 1 verse 25, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Deception. Jeremiah 5:26-27, for among my people are found wicked men, they lay wait, as he that setteth snares, they set a trap, they catch men. As a cage is full of birds, so are their houses full of deceit, therefore they are become great, and waxen rich. Make clear what cannot be the truth. 9/11 cannot be and should not be underestimated. It is the justification for all the U.S. wars that followed it. From a spiritual point of view, there are so many lies around it. Lies, from a spiritual point of view, paralyze consciousness. They cast a fog over consciousness. So it is a hygienic task of truth seekers to make clear what cannot be the truth, even if they can't find the full explanation. Thus there are two sets of laws, one for the poor who are the slaves, and virtually no laws for the ruling elite families and their enforcers, which are the police and system slaves in general. In truth, we live on the earth and not in countries. They have divided up the earth into countries through use of force projected through imperialism and war. All of which has been done without any proof authority to do so from our Creator. The Bible talks about God and Lord God. Genesis chapter 1, you will read all about God and His creation of the earth and all that exists. Then in Genesis chapter 2 forward it is all about Lord God and His enslavement of man and claiming to be the creator of all that exists. However, God the Creator did not create religion or ask us to worship Him in any way. God went so far as to give man dominion over all the earth, meaning we all rule equally as stated in Genesis chapter 1 verse 26. That said, we can clearly observe that God's will has been thwarted by those who pretend to uphold it, mainly being the popes of the Catholic Church and all leaders of religion in general, including Islam, Hinduism etc. This is simply because in the Bible, in God's own words, He gave all man dominion, and the various religious institutions are there to create enforceable laws that are designed to enslave and restrict free thought and expression and mostly enslave people. The foundation of freedom is that we are all supposed to be free to think and do what we wish to without anyone using any force against us to make us comply in fear for our safety. The justice system is a complete farce in that it pretends to represent the will of the people by creating laws which enslave them. In many cases there is so much greed and corruption that goes on, that the only thought that goes into creating laws, is this law going to be good for the ruling elite or not? They are all there to serve the ruling elite, and so as long the laws don't apply to the enforcers or the ones creating them, the ruling elite simply create a system of laws that benefit them, especially laws concerning the creation of money and usury through loans. The foundation of mammon or money is based in fraud. For whatever they use for money, be it gold, silver, fiat currencies, the value of the species of mammon does not reflect the labor put in to create it. For example, you can hit a ore deposit where you simply chip away at the deposit for 10 minutes and get 24 ounces of gold, worth about $42,000 for 10 minutes of work versus laboring at some dead-end job for a whole month and getting $1,200 in pay. Thus those who control the amount of mammon allowed to circulate and own the sources of the mammon get to have everything that they want, while everyone else slaves to get a small amount of mammon in comparison to pay for the basics. It allows for inequality to artificially exist, allowing the few to have a lot more than the many in terms of products and services, and ultimately power over the system to control others. The other aspect to this is that fiat currency, the money, is merely paper with some ink and some fancy security protection built in as to not allowing others to copy it easily in creating counterfeit notes. The problem again comes into play with the labor required to make the notes compared to the labor to earn a note. The Federal Reserve and other scams like it run through central banks print the money at a labor cost of pennies per sheet of bills of any denomination and give it to the people as private money for the face value, enriching themselves from pennies to produce, let's say, a $100 bill, then selling into the market at face value, making a huge profit on it, then charge interest on it and collect that interest through personal income tax, which has nothing to do with running the services needed in a country. The services are paid through issuing checks and using the signature of the one cashing the check to create the funds for the check, thus the funds created by the signature was simply a data entry into the computer. So in order to stem inflation, the personal income tax and other taxes are implemented and economies are set up so that there are many low-paying jobs and only a few high-paying jobs. Thus the system of control is enforced through artificially created scarcities. The other thing they do with fiat currencies is valuate different currencies at different values so that they can create artificial scarcity in one country and plenty in others, such as you see with African countries versus European and North American countries. Where we see starving African children and a simple donation of $30 per month and will save one child from starvation, we see $30 as for paying for one meal at a restaurant. Yet there is no defensible argument that can be put forward that 1 hour's labor by someone is worth something different by someone else. The idea that we have higher education and can do more difficult work does not detract from the fact that education should be free to begin with, and simply because you learn to do something that others can't doesn't mean that your labor is worth more, it just means that you have improved yourself to help serve others better, to make a better world or place for your fellow man. This brings us to the notion of service to self versus service to others. Service to self to enrich oneself over the detriment of others creates in the end a very unbalanced and dangerous situation, where many laws and people are needed as enforcers to hold the masses back from you, allowing you to enjoy the fruits of the labor of others with little or no labor from yourself, and thus dictate to the masses how they should live and be. Versus service to others, where we are all individuals wanting to be the best we can be in service to our fellow man and willing to make do with a little less so everyone is cared for in terms of the necessities of life and meaningful purpose to do what they want to help build a future based on equality and love for all life on earth. On a side note, those who believe that professional sports are fairly run, you have got to get your head out of the sand and look around. It is so obvious how one team is heavily penalized for the most minor infraction while another gets away with murder, so to speak. Star players are given room from other players so they can have the time and opportunities to line up good shots on the goal, such as it is in hockey and basketball. Sports has always been used as a distraction for the masses, getting them more involved in what team wins or loses as being more important as to how you are being enslaved. The people behind all this are Satanists. They are at war with God and thus have no will to follow what God said in His own words, that we all share in dominion over the earth. Outside of the religious connotations, who is the creator of the earth? And if you don't know, then where do you get to assume that you can use force of law against others to create widespread poverty and despair so you can have a sheltered and wealthy lifestyle? They do not care about us, as they only care about themselves and what is in it for them. Further, the level of pedophilia and satanic human sacrifice runs rapid as they live to serve a top-down structure of control. There are also evil spirits that they worship that feed off the fear created by them through their system of control. Many people are not aware of the satanic rituals that take place in their churches today, one being cannibalism of Christ's body through the bread and wine thing in Catholic churches. Simply put, from cradle to grave you are feed a bunch of shit, told you are worthless and a sinner, and then spat out once you cannot produce as a good slave anymore. Each day I cringe in disbelief at the level of lies people buy into. The big one being that if you work hard like the rest of us, you too can have a big house and fancy cars. Well, minimum wage doesn't do that for you. Those that do get good paying jobs have to usually pay off a mortgage in student loans and pay heavy taxes on the larger sums of money they earn to give to the ruling elite for having a few hired slaves to print money for them, sell you and through their phony front corporations called governments at face value, and then charge you interest as it is merely considered debt money. There is no way to pay back the debt, so again when it all crashes they just wash away the debt and start over, except this time they aim to kill off the 80% or more of the world's population by devaluing the currencies and creating artificial scarcity through lack of money. In the USA they are looking to pass a law making it illegal for people to grow their own food and sell food outside of the controlled system, thus bringing in the enforcers again to create widespread starvation once the currency is devalued. The $26 trillion dollar theft that Congress allowed to take place to bail out the bankers was not used to prop up the defaults on the homes, but rather was used to give the bloodline families and their enforcers the money they needed to survive a devaluation of the world currencies. They also own most of the God as well. So where does that put us? It puts us, the 93% who have to endure all this, into a position of wondering why are we allowing a few to control the many in this way? We can and should have changed all this many years ago to doing things out of service to others rather, meaning we do what we love to do and do it for the love of our fellow man. The few that are among us that are perpetuating this system of insanity through their enforcers care only about themselves and what is in it for them. Slaves must not be allowed to have weapons and is the reason that they are desperately trying to disarm us before the hammer comes down. Why we are being made to suffer and potentially being wiped out by the few is merely so that the few can have pedophile and satanic heaven on earth, controlling their slaves with microchips and non-lethal weapons. They want to torture us and want to bring about a level of suffering like no one could ever believe possible and yet enjoy all the fruits of our discoveries and technological advancements. We do have some help in that the truth vibrations are getting stronger and stronger by the day now. Within the next 10 years I suspect much of this will be over with as the Earth aligns with our galactic center and we start doing what we do out of love for one another instead of self-gain for the few. How we get there I am not sure, but I can tell you each day I move forward in this, I hate the system a little bit more and yearn to be free of it. I think the introduction of free energy technology and a move to make everyone self-sufficient in terms of food, shelter and clothing will go a long way in helping us break free. But you can see them moving to bring in laws along with their enforcers to stop that from happening. So I suspect at some point a line will be drawn and a few will be killed by the many to bring about change. I hope they can see that they are in a lost cause, but they think their enforcers along with their laws will keep people buying into the system long enough for the few to kill off the many. So when will you draw your line and when will you begin to try to do your part in helping with the transition from slavery to freedom?